beautiful as she is not so much beautiful as interesting. She is preeminently Gothic, and all the more since she set herself off with some Greek airs and erected classic temples on her crags. In a word and above all, she is a curiosity. A few words Robert Louis Stevenson wrote in the second half of the 19th century and refers to what he saw when looking out on his native city. Edinburgh has changed much since, but she has steered clear from erecting buildings that could have blotted out her backdrop. If we now look out at this scene from her main street or from her gardens in the valley between, the Greek airs of these classic temples and Gothic towers stacked upon her crags are still there and remain one of Edinburgh's finest assets to view. Then, if we look above all this, higher, on the pinnacle of this crag, there's a fairy tale-like castle overlooking the whole city. Edinburgh's historic landscape is a curiosity worth exploring. It's a landscape that could have been designed as a theatrical stage, and this stage has seen a good few dramatic scenes played out on it. These are the scenes that will open up to you as we present Edinburgh's story. Our aim here in telling this story is to help get you familiarised with all the interesting and unusual phenomena that's crammed into this city. After watching, we hope you have a picture that whets the appetite and gives a desire to explore our nooks and crannies a little further. So let's get started. I'm Rick Matthews. This native city of Stevenson's is also my hometown. Edinburgh is small for a city, and I think this is its charm, as it's fairly easy to get around here. Although a day ticket for the bus service works well, as the areas to visit are spread over two steep hills. On the highest of these hills is the city's old town, stretching for about a mile from top to bottom, a backbone with wynds and closes descending its slopes on either side, bearing a striking resemblance to a turtle, says Hugo Arnott, another city native that lived a century before Stevenson. This was a time described by some as the beginning of Edinburgh's golden age. Less kind writers of them would compare the borough to a smelly old herringbone. The medieval old town was getting a bit crowded, buildings rising up until they could raise them no higher. They couldn't cram closes and wynds any closer, and the sewerage system up here wasn't great. With the warning of Gardaloo, the slops were thrown straight out of the window, running down the slope to the loft below. Something had to be done. The old town was creaking around its edges and wanted to break out of its perch-like existence. Hence the construction of a bridge. This would span a valley from the north of the old town, giving the borough better access with its port down at Leith. The North Bridge allowed Edinburgh to venture forward, building and developing a new town on the adjacent ridge. In the following 80 years, further new towns developed down the north slope of this ridge. They are collectively known as the New Town. Simplicity rules in the naming of a few places in Edinburgh. The New Town, with elegant squares, grand neoclassical facades and symmetrical streets, wide enough to turn a horse and carriage, has some fine examples of Georgian architecture. Describing itself as the Athens of the North, Edinburgh even attempted here to build its own pantheon on the close by Calton Hill. A stretch, too far I think. A playground for the affluent and the literati, This was a city that drew like a magnet people that could best be described as those with a curiosity and interest in how to free mankind from ignorance and poverty. That's a big task indeed. It was after all the Age of Enlightenment in Europe, an age which gave emphasis to reason and science and philosophy. Edinburgh was in there, a fully participating member, establishing itself as the centre of Scotland's very own Enlightenment. Now, here in this new town was a splendid feeling of space and airiness. Watch out though, this was also a new town that gave rise to another of Stevenson's observations, its drafty parallelograms, especially at the junctions of these airy symmetrical streets, designed to aid, as he thought, rather than protect from the sometimes cold, damp and Greek weather that can blow up from its northern exposure and howl right through these streets. Some of the palatial homes that the Newtown residents occupied eventually became homes to stuffy bankers and financial institutes. They now in turn are vacating some of their impressive Newtown offices and relocating in purpose-built financial centres throughout the city. Meanwhile, the streets and squares have given themselves over to restaurants, clubs, bars and boutique hotels. They easily squeeze themselves into the neoclassical buildings which line the ridge of this lesser hill. And those changes in the new town give the place nowadays an upbeat and lively cosmopolitan feel. And on that, we now come to the end of part 1 in our story of Edinburgh. Check out our website rickmatthews.com, where we'll put up the second part as soon as it's ready. In this, we'll make our way to the first stop of our tour, and on the way, without getting bogged down in a primeval swamp, we'll explore how the city may have got its first inhabitants. Then onwards, to a time where there is documentation on Edinburgh's humble beginnings, up there on the crag and tail of the city's backdrop.